Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez entered the Senate hearing room believing she would lecture the older white men about progressive values. Senator John Kennedy from Louisiana observed a bartender possessing an economics degree she failed to comprehend, ready to champion policies with uncalculated costs. He possessed 5 minutes to pose inquiries, while she lacked satisfactory responses. The ensuing events would render her the most ridiculed member of Congress. The Senate Budget Committee had summoned AOC to testify regarding the Green New Deal, which was her signature legislation promising to revolutionize the American economy and rescue the planet from climatic catastrophe. She agreed to appear because she believed Senate testimony would provide her gravitas, making her appear serious and substantive rather than merely another online personality. She had dedicated hours to preparing talking points regarding climate change and social justice, along with the moral imperative for bold action. She possessed statistics regarding carbon emissions and anecdotes concerning communities impacted by environmental degradation. She was prepared to inspire and challenge and argue that only dramatic measures could salvage the future. However, she was entirely unprepared for Senator John Kennedy. The 72-year-old Louisiana Republican resembled everyone's grandfather with his rumpled suit and an accent sounding like he had just wandered in from a bayou crawfish boil. When introducing himself to witnesses, he would invariably say something like, "I am just a simple country lawyer, attempting to comprehend this complicated material you smart folks discuss." He possessed a method of appearing harmless and almost slow, as if struggling to keep pace with the big city types and their sophisticated concepts. What most witnesses failed to realize until too late was that John Kennedy was a Rhodes Scholar who had studied at Oxford. He held a law degree from the University of Virginia and had practiced as an attorney for decades before entering the political arena. During that time, he had perfected the art of allowing hostile witnesses to destroy themselves using their own words. The simple country lawyer routine was a performance that was devastatingly effective, because people consistently underestimated him until he had already ensnared them. Kennedy had spent the morning before the hearing in his office with his staff reviewing every public statement AOC had made regarding the Green New Deal. They had compiled what Kennedy termed his simple questions list, which consisted of direct basic inquiries that any serious policy proposal should answer easily. These included how much this will cost and how many jobs it will create, and specifically how you will pay for it and where the electricity will come from if we eliminate fossil fuels. These questions sounded almost too simple to ask, which was exactly why they were so dangerous when the recipient lacked answers. AOC possessed talking points and passion and righteous conviction along with millions of Twitter followers who hung on her every word. What she lacked was a spreadsheet or an actual implementation plan containing real numbers or answers to simple questions. Senator Kennedy was about to expose that deficiency in the most polite and devastating 5 minutes of her political career. If you have ever wondered what transpires when someone who sounds smart encounters someone who actually is smart, you are about to discover the result. When Kennedy smiled his grandfatherly smile and asked for help understanding while AOC became increasingly flustered, the entire country would witness the difference between online popularity and actual policy knowledge. The Senate Budget Committee hearing room was filled with about 200 people, including staff members and journalists and lobbyists and citizens who managed to obtain passes. The room possessed that particular atmosphere of official Washington business, with its wood paneling and stern portraits of previous committee chairs staring down from the walls. C-SPAN cameras were positioned to capture everything, creating a permanent record that would remain available forever. AOC entered and took her seat at the witness table wearing a professional outfit that managed to appear both congressional and fashionable. She looked confident and even excited, as this was her moment to defend her vision on a national stage and show she belonged in these halls of power. The hearing commenced with opening statements from committee members displaying the usual political theater of both sides, establishing their positions before any questioning started. Democrats praised AOC for her bold vision and moral clarity regarding climate change, while Republicans expressed skepticism concerning the costs and feasibility of such economic transformation. AOC sat through it all looking composed, while occasionally nodding when Democrats voiced support and maintaining a neutral expression when Republicans were critical. Then the time arrived for questions, and the chairman recognized Senator Kennedy for 5 minutes. Kennedy smiled warmly at AOC as he shuffled some papers in front of him, projecting an image of a kindly older man desiring a friendly conversation. Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, thank you so much for being here today, and I appreciate you taking the time to testify before our committee. His Louisiana accent was thick and slow, with each word taking its time as he mentioned reading about her Green New Deal proposal. He noted that it sounded mighty ambitious to transform the entire economy and rebuild every building in America and achieve zero emissions in 10 years. He smiled even more warmly, like he was genuinely impressed by her vision, and hoped she could help him out because he was just a simple country lawyer. He asked what all this costs, just a ballpark figure, so he could wrap his mind around it, which sounded innocent enough to be a trap. AOC launched into her prepared talking points regarding how one cannot place a price tag on saving the planet and how the cost of inaction was higher. Kennedy listened patiently, nodding along, maintaining that grandfatherly expression, until she paused, and he jumped in with that same gentle tone. "Ma'am, I appreciate all that, but I am asking a simpler question, if you do not mind," he said, while holding up his hand to count on his fingers. "What does your plan cost, since you proposed it, and asked us to consider it, meaning you must have some idea of the numbers? Just help me understand if it is 10 trillion or 20 trillion or 50 trillion or whatever the ballpark figure might be." AOC shifted in her seat, because this was not proceeding how she had expected, and admitted the costs had not been fully calculated yet. Kennedy interrupted gently to confirm that she had proposed transforming the entire American economy, but could not tell the committee what it would cost. "I am saying the estimates vary widely," she stammered, but Kennedy noted that she did not have a number, and his smile never wavered. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly, that you want to rebuild every building and replace every car and completely change electricity generation. You are asking the American people to support this massive change. But when I ask what it costs, you do not have an answer. Ma'am, when I go to the hardware store back home in Louisiana to renovate my house, the first thing they ask me is my budget. It seems to me that is something you might want to figure out before proposing the biggest economic transformation in American history." AOC's cheeks flushed as she argued that with all due respect, the climate crisis demands bold action, and concerns about cost should not prevent us. "I am not trying to prevent anything," Kennedy said, with a tone remaining gentle but firm, as he was just trying to understand the request. "You are a member of Congress with an economics degree from Boston University, so surely you understand that before spending money, you need to know the amount. That is basic economics, yet you cannot tell us which concerns me and should concern every American watching this testimony. You are asking us to support the biggest spending program in human history, and you do not know what it costs." AOC tried to recover by mentioning that multiple think tanks have studied this and came up with numbers between $50 trillion and $93 trillion. Kennedy said, no longer playing quite as dumb, that those were their estimates, but she had dismissed them as not being the point. "So I am asking you, what is the cost, not what think tanks say," and the silence that followed was uncomfortable, because she had no answer. Kennedy let the silence sit for a moment longer than necessary, then moved on to his next question, knowing he had scored his first point. Let me ask you about something else that has been in the news regarding Amazon wanting to build their second headquarters in New York City. They promised 25,000 good-paying jobs, but you opposed it, and they decided to go elsewhere. So I am trying to understand the economics. AOC sat up straighter, clearly feeling she was on firmer ground, stating that Amazon was asking for nearly $3 billion in tax breaks. She argued that $3 billion could have been better spent on our communities and education and infrastructure, benefiting everyone rather than just one corporation. Kennedy nodded along like he was following her logic and asked her to help him understand that the tax breaks could be spent elsewhere. Tax breaks occur when you do not collect taxes. You normally would correct, meaning you agree not to collect certain taxes for a benefit. But ma'am, if Amazon does not come, do you get that money to spend? Kennedy asked with a delivery so gentle the trap was hidden. AOC hesitated, arguing the city would not be giving away $3 billion, but Kennedy pressed, asking if Amazon does not come, do you get the money? Simple question, asking if Amazon does not build their headquarters in New York. Does the city have $3 billion to spend on schools? The silence stretched out as everyone could see AOC struggling because she was realizing her understanding of the Amazon deal had been fundamentally wrong. No, she finally admitted quietly, and Kennedy repeated the word while his voice remained gentle but now carried an edge of teaching. Because I think there has been confusion that a tax break is money you have sitting in a bank account you can choose to spend. It is money you agree not to collect in the future, meaning if the company does not come, you get zero, which seemed to frustrate her. Let us do some simple math together, Kennedy interrupted, as he actually pulled out a pen and paper like he was working through a basic arithmetic problem. Amazon said they would bring $27 billion in economic activity over time, and the tax breaks were worth $3 billion. So what does that equal? $24 billion, AOC said quietly, and Kennedy repeated the number while writing it down and holding it up like a teacher showing the class. That is how much New York would have gained even after the tax breaks. But Amazon left. So how much does New York get now? Nothing, AOC admitted, and Kennedy wrote a big zero on his paper, noting she turned $24 billion into zero. You turned 25,000 jobs into zero, and all that tax revenue into zero because you thought tax breaks were money sitting in a bank account. You got an economics degree from Boston University, which is a prestigious school that probably cost your parents $60,000 a year. And they did not teach you the difference between tax breaks and government spending because the room was dead silent, except for the cameras. Ma'am, I am just a simple lawyer from Louisiana, but even I know that $24 billion is better than zero. Those were real jobs for real families and real tax revenue for New York schools and infrastructure and real economic activity. You chased it all away because you did not understand basic economics, and those families are not better off because of your decision. Kennedy looked at his notes like he was just remembering something and asked about her statement that unemployment is low because everyone has 2 jobs. AOC sighed, stating that the statement had been taken out of context, but Kennedy simply asked if she had said it. I am not asking about context yet, but rather if you said that unemployment is low because people have 2 jobs. Kennedy clarified. Yes, but the point I was making, she started. But Kennedy asked her to help him understand the math on that as he pulled out a calculator. If I have 2 jobs, how many times am I counted in the unemployment statistics? Kennedy asked, so AOC could see where this was going. Once she repeated, but Kennedy explained that if everyone in this room has 2 jobs, they are each counted once. So having 2 jobs does not make unemployment look lower, and that is not how unemployment is calculated, despite her broader point about wages. Ma'am, I understand you might have been trying to make a broader point, but your statement was specifically about unemployment being low because of 2 jobs. That is mathematically impossible because the Bureau of Labor Statistics counts 1 employed person with 2 jobs, not 2 employed people. Do you see what I am saying? Kennedy asked, with a tone so patient and gentle like he was explaining basic arithmetic to a child. It made AOC's error seem all the more glaring as she said defensively that she misspoke, and everyone makes mistakes. That is fair. Kennedy nodded. But ma'am, you have an economics degree from Boston University, and your parents spent $240,000. You do not know how unemployment statistics are calculated, which is not misspeaking, but rather not knowing something fundamental to economics. That concerns me, because you are proposing huge changes to our economy, and if you do not know how unemployment works, we cannot trust your judgment. Senator, I think it is clear you are just trying to make me look bad rather than having a genuine conversation, she said, looking angry. I am not trying to make you look bad, Kennedy replied, but rather asking you to explain a statement you made that was factually wrong. He glanced at his papers, noting he still had a couple of minutes, and moved to his next topic without giving her recovery time. You support Medicare, for all which studies estimate would cost about $32 trillion over 10 years, or roughly $3 trillion per year. How do we pay for that? He asked as AOC launched into talking points about taxing the wealthy and corporations. Kennedy listened with that patient expression, then held up his hand to stop her, and suggested they do the math together if she did not mind. All the billionaires in America combined are worth about $4.6 trillion, which represents their total wealth if we confiscated every penny. But Medicare, for all, costs $32 trillion over 10 years. So that is $4.6 trillion toward a $32 trillion cost. Where does the other $27 trillion come from? AOC began asking about corporate taxes and wealth taxes on the very wealthy. Ma'am, Kennedy interrupted gently, noting that even if we taxed every corporation in America at 100% of their profits, we could not pay. Even if we taxed every single person making over $100,000 a year at 100%, the math simply does not work. I am not trying to be difficult, but I am just asking where the money comes from beyond talking points. AOC looked frustrated, stating that other countries make it work like Canada and the UK, but Kennedy noted they do not have our population. They do not spend what we spend on defense because we defend them, and they have different healthcare systems than what you are proposing. And most importantly, I am not asking about other countries, but rather about your plan for America, and where the $32 trillion comes from. The silence that followed was uncomfortable for everyone except Kennedy, who sat there patiently waiting for an answer he knew would not come. The details would need to be worked out, AOC finally said, but Kennedy repeated that the cost is not a mere detail. The cost is pretty much the most important thing when you are proposing the biggest expansion of government in American history. That is like me going to the bank and asking for a loan to buy a house and saying the details of repayment need to be worked out. The bank would not give me that loan, so why should the American people give you $32 trillion without knowing how you will pay? See, this is a pattern I am noticing where you do not know costs for the Green New Deal or how to pay for Medicare. You did not understand basic tax policy regarding Amazon, nor did you know how unemployment is calculated despite your economics degree. Kennedy glanced at the clock, realizing he had about 90 seconds left in his 5 minutes, and asked about her record real quick. "You have been in Congress for about 3 years now, so what major legislation have you successfully passed into law?" AOC looked caught off guard and mentioned she had introduced important legislation and shifted the national conversation on issues. "I asked what you have passed," Kennedy said, simply referring to bills that became law and asking for her list of major accomplishments. She claimed the Green New Deal changed how we discuss climate policy, but Kennedy interrupted, noting it got 0 votes in the Senate. Not a single senator voted for it. Not even Democrats. And in the House, your own party would not bring it to the floor. So that is not passed legislation, but rather a failed proposal, he noted, as AOC tried to pivot to talking about amendments and hearings. "Ma'am, raising awareness is what social media influencers do, but you are a member of Congress where the job is passing laws. You write bills and get them through committee and pass them in the House and hope the Senate passes them so the president signs them." "How many bills have you gotten through that process?" Kennedy asked. And the answer was obvious from AOC's silence, which was none. 3 years in Congress, Kennedy said, not bothering to hide his point anymore, and you have 0 major legislation passed into law. You have millions of Twitter followers, which is something, but Twitter is not the same as governing, and tweeting is not legislating. He gathered his papers as his time expired, stating, "Mr. Chairman, I think I am out of time, but I appreciate the testimony." The chairman thanked Kennedy, but the senator held up his hand, asking for just 30 more seconds to make a final point. Kennedy turned to look at AOC with an expression becoming slightly less grandfatherly and slightly more serious, though still fundamentally respectful in tone. "Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, I want to thank you for your testimony today, and I mean that sincerely, because you have been very revealing. You came here to tell us about your Green New Deal, but when I asked you what it costs, you could not tell me. When I asked about the Amazon decision, you showed you do not understand the difference between tax breaks and government spending. When I asked about unemployment, you showed you do not know how it is calculated, and when I asked about Medicare, you could not show the math. And when I asked about your legislative record, you could not name a single major accomplishment, despite your voice remaining gentle. Now, I think you are a talented communicator who is very good on social media and knows how to get attention. Those are real skills, but they are marketing skills rather than governing skills," Kennedy said as he picked up his papers slowly. "There is a big difference between sounding smart and being smart, and between talking about big ideas and knowing how to implement them. Today, you have shown us which side of those divides you are on," as Kennedy stood up, maintaining that courteous Southern gentleman demeanor. "I am just a simple country lawyer from Louisiana, but I know you should probably know what things cost before transforming the economy. Before you lecture people about economics, you should probably understand basic economic concepts and pass some actual legislation that shows you know what you are doing. I hope you will go back and do your homework and learn how policies work in practice, not just in theory. The American people deserve better than bartender economics from someone with a fancy degree who does not understand it." Kennedy nodded to the chairman and yielded back his time, causing the room to erupt with Republicans applauding while Democrats looked uncomfortable. AOC sat at the witness table, looking stunned and humiliated, because a 72-year-old senator had made her look completely unprepared. The clip did not just go viral on conservative media platforms, but went absolutely everywhere, crossing partisan and demographic boundaries in rare ways. Within 12 hours, the full 5 minutes of Kennedy questioning AOC had been viewed 38 million times across various social platforms. Within a week, over 100 million people had watched some version of the exchange, making it one of the most viewed hearings. What made the video spread far beyond typical partisan circles was the nature of Kennedy's questioning and AOC's responses. He had not engaged in personal attacks or raised his voice, but simply asked basic, straightforward questions regarding implementation and cost. These were fundamental questions that anyone proposing to transform the American economy should have ready answers for, yet AOC could not answer them. That was not Kennedy being unfair, but rather AOC being unprepared, and millions of Americans watching could see the difference clearly. The phrase, "just a simple country lawyer," became an instant cultural phenomenon, with video editors creating elaborate compilation videos. One particularly viral video intercut Kennedy's questioning of AOC with clips of him questioning other progressive witnesses following the same pattern. Conservative media outlets played the exchange on an endless loop, emphasizing Kennedy's technique as a master class in cross-examination. Sean Hannity dedicated an entire monologue to the exchange, praising Kennedy for asking basic questions instead of accepting talking points. Talk radio hosts across the country played the audio, making Kennedy's voice and questioning style familiar to millions of regular listeners. Mainstream outlets found themselves unable to ignore the story because the viewing numbers were simply too massive, despite attempts to be sympathetic. Some analysts suggested demanding specific cost figures was a bad faith tactic, but these defenses mostly fell flat because anyone could watch the video. MSNBC coverage was more divided, with some admitting she walked into a trap she built herself by not doing basic homework. The exchange had immediate and specific policy impacts, as the Green New Deal became completely toxic politically after Kennedy's questioning. Democrats running in competitive races wanted nothing to do with it and studiously avoided mentioning AOC's specific proposal by name. Campaign strategists for moderate Democrats began actively advising their candidates to distance themselves from AOC and her policy proposals. Medicare for All also suffered collateral damage, as Kennedy's question about paying for $32 trillion resonated powerfully with voters. The Amazon example became particularly damaging to AOC's credibility on economic issues because Kennedy explained the difference regarding tax breaks clearly. Defenders of the Amazon deal felt vindicated, while local New York news outlets interviewed experts explaining what the city had lost. Perhaps most significantly, AOC's entire political brand took a major hit that would prove difficult to recover from. She had built her persona on being the smart young progressive, but Kennedy's 5 minutes of simple questions had shattered that image. Kennedy himself became a viral sensation, with young conservatives sharing his questioning techniques as models for how to debate progressives. 6 months after the hearing, AOC's polling numbers showed the damage, with favorability ratings dropping 12 points among independents. She became notably more cautious about making specific policy claims and relied more heavily on prepared statements and talking points. The ultimate irony was that Kennedy's performance was not particularly complex, as he just asked simple questions and insisted on answers. This was a Rhodes Scholar disguised as a country lawyer exposing a bartender with an economics degree she did not understand.